I didn't take the house from my cheating husband. His own mother did. She'd known about Petra for 8 months and decided the legal system wasn't going to do what she was perfectly positioned to do herself. Background. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but after everything that happened over the past 14 months, I feel like I owe it to every woman who has ever sat across from a divorce attorney wondering how the math could possibly work out in her favor. It didn't start with a betrayal, exactly. It started with a phone call from a woman who had spent 11 years making it quietly, persistently clear that I was never quite good enough for her son. My name isn't important. What's important is that I'm 36, I have a daughter named Rosie who is 8 years old, I have a master's degree in landscape architecture, and for the better part of a decade I built a life in a craftsman house on Elm Court that I repainted myself, whose garden I designed from bare soil, whose kitchen I renovated on weekends while my husband Marcus played golf with colleagues whose names I never bothered to learn. Marcus is 38. He is charming in the way that men who grow up being told they are exceptional tend to be charming, effortlessly, and only when it benefits them. His mother, Diane, is 63. She has silver hair she keeps in a precise cut, a collection of silk blouses in variations of ivory and cream, and a way of smiling at you during family dinners that never quite reaches her eyes. For 11 years, Diane and I maintained a functional détente. She didn't love me. I understood that. I also understood, because I am reasonably perceptive, that she didn't particularly respect me. I was the woman who had taken her son from the more suitable woman she'd had in mind, a girl named Courtney from his college years who apparently had better family connections and a more pliable personality. I was not pliable. That had always been the problem. When Marcus and I married in 2014, Diane transferred the deed of the house on Elm Court into Marcus's name as a wedding gift. I remember sitting at the closing table, watching the notary stamp the pages, and thinking it was a strange gift, real property given to one spouse and not both. My own mother, seated beside me, had leaned over and whispered, "She's drawing a map, sweetheart." I told her she was being uncharitable. I was wrong. The house was appraised at $480,000 at the time of transfer. By 2024, with the market doing what it had done, it was worth approximately $810,000. We had a mortgage of roughly $190,000 remaining. The equity, in any reasonable calculation, was something a divorce attorney would describe as a central marital asset. And because Marcus had received it as a gift from his mother, titled solely in his name, he had a plausible argument, depending on jurisdiction and judge, that it was separate property. I had a different problem. I had spent 11 years of my professional expertise and personal labor making that house worth significantly more than it had been when Diane handed it over. I had designed and installed the garden that had been featured in 2 regional publications. I had project managed a kitchen renovation that added, conservatively, $60,000 to the market value. I had repainted every room, replaced the original windows, converted the detached garage into a studio that I rented out for $1,200 a month. And Marcus had spent the last 18 months sleeping with a 29-year-old event coordinator named Petra who worked for his company. Part 1. The phone call. I found out about Petra the way most people find out about these things. Not through a dramatic confrontation, not through a private investigator, but through a text message sent to the wrong number. Marcus meant to text Petra. He texted me instead. The message said, "Can't wait for Thursday. Miss your mouth." It was sent at 11:14 on a Tuesday night while he was, ostensibly, at a work dinner. I sat with that text message for 3 days before I did anything. This is the part that surprises people when I tell the story, the 3 days of stillness. I didn't cry immediately. I didn't confront him. I went to work, I picked Rosie up from school, I made dinner, I went to bed. Inside, I was constructing something. A framework. A set of questions in order of priority. How long? What did he tell her about our marriage? What does this mean for Rosie? What does this mean for the house? On the 4th day, I called an attorney named Sandra Chen, who had been recommended by a colleague. Sandra was calm, precise, and extraordinarily expensive. She was exactly what I needed. I made an appointment for the following Thursday and said nothing to Marcus. The meeting with Sandra was educational in the way that discovering you've been standing on unstable ground is educational, informative, terrifying, clarifying. She explained the landscape. The house, titled in Marcus's name, received as a gift from a direct family member before or during the marriage, was a complicated asset. The degree to which my contributions, labor, professional expertise, increased market value, could be recognized depended on documentation, testimony, and judicial discretion. It was not a clean case. She told me this with the equanimity of someone who had delivered this news many times before. "What's your documentation situation?" she asked. I had kept records. I am a landscape architect. I document things professionally and by instinct. I had receipts, contractor invoices, project photographs with timestamps, the published articles featuring the garden, rental income records from the studio. Sandra looked at the folder I placed on her desk and allowed herself a small, satisfied expression. "That's a good start," she said. "But I want to be honest with you. Even with all of this, the house is his strongest argument. His attorney is going to build a wall around that asset." I drove home with a sick feeling that had nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with Rosie, with the image of explaining to my 8-year-old that the house she'd grown up in, the garden we'd planted together, the bedroom with the window seat I'd built for her, were things we couldn't keep. That was a Wednesday in February. The phone call from Diane came on a Friday. I almost didn't answer. Diane called perhaps 4 times a year under normal circumstances, and never on a Friday afternoon. But something made me pick up. Some instinct I can't entirely explain. "Eleanor." She used my full name. No one called me Eleanor except her. "I'd like to meet with you." "Not with Marcus. Just us." I said nothing for a moment. "When?" "Tomorrow. I can come to the coffee shop on Birchwood. 11 o'clock. I agreed before I had time to think about whether it was a good idea. I didn't sleep well that night. I ran through scenarios. She knew about the divorce proceedings, which had been filed 2 weeks prior. Marcus had told her, presumably. I imagined she was coming to advocate for her son, to ask me to be reasonable about the house, to remind me in her careful way that I had received a great deal in this marriage and ought to be gracious in how I left it. I prepared myself for that conversation. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early, ordered an Americano, and sat with my hands folded on the table, composing my expression into something neutral and difficult to read. Diane arrived at exactly 11. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying a leather portfolio. She sat down across from me, folded her hands in a near mirror of mine, and looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not warmth, exactly. It was closer to assessment, and something underneath it that I could only describe, later, as a form of tired honesty. "I know about the affair," she said. No preamble. No coffee order. "I've known for 8 months. I held very still. A friend of mine saw them together at a restaurant in the valley last spring and told me." She looked at the table. "I want you to know I am not proud of what I did next, which was nothing. I told myself it was not my marriage. I told myself these things sometimes pass." She looked up. "I told myself things I no longer believe." I still said nothing. I had learned, over years of negotiating with contractors and clients and Diane herself, that silence is frequently the most powerful response available. "Marcus is my son and I love him," she said. "But I know what he is. I have known for longer than I'd like to admit. And I know what you did to that house. I watched you do it. I watched you build something over 11 years that he could not have built without you, and I said nothing about that either, because I had my own stakes in how the story was told." She opened the leather portfolio and placed a sheet of paper on the table between us. It was a property summary sheet for the house on Elm Court. "The house is in his name," she said. "But I am his mother, and I have a right of first refusal written into the original deed transfer that his attorney apparently hasn't thought to mention yet." She tapped the paper. "It means that before Marcus can claim full proceeds from any sale or settlement involving that property, I have the right to purchase it back at fair market value." She paused. "Or at whatever value I choose to exercise that right at." I looked at the paper. I looked at her. "I am prepared to sell you the house," Diane said, "at $405,000. That is half of the current appraised value, rounded. You would assume the existing mortgage. The net cost to you would be approximately $215,000 above the mortgage balance. I have a contact at a credit union who can structure a private financing arrangement." The number landed in my chest like something physical. "Why?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Because the legal system will probably give him the house," she said. "And I find that I cannot watch that happen." Update 1, March, weeks 1 to 3. I went home from that coffee shop and called Sandra Chen from my car, parked in the lot, with the heat running and my hands not entirely steady. Sandra was quiet while I explained. Then she said, "Tell me you didn't sign anything." "I didn't sign anything." "Good. Come in Monday morning. Bring the property summary sheet." The following week was the most intensive legal education of my life. Sandra pulled the original deed from the county recorder's office and confirmed what Diane had described, a right of first refusal clause, embedded in the original transfer language, that had been drafted by Diane's own estate attorney in 2014. It was, Sandra explained, legally valid. It was also the kind of clause that Marcus's attorney, a combative man named Garrett Wills, appear to have either overlooked or failed to flag. He'll argue it's being exercised in bad faith, Sandra said. That it's a coordinated strategy between you and his mother. Is it? She looked at me. It's a legal instrument being exercised by its holder. The motivation of the holder is largely irrelevant to its validity. A pause. But we need to be careful. This transaction has to be clean. Arm's length. Proper appraisal, proper documentation, financing that holds up to scrutiny. I met with Diane twice more over the next 2 weeks. These were not warm meetings, exactly, but they were honest ones. She had a real estate attorney she trusted who was not Marcus's family attorney. I brought Sandra. We sat around a conference table and reviewed the structure of the proposed transaction. Diane was selling her right of first refusal, exercised on her own behalf, and then immediately transferring the property to me through a private sale at the agreed price. The paperwork was meticulous. Sandra insisted on an independent appraisal, which came in at $812,000. Diane's right of first refusal entitled her to purchase at that appraised value. The below-market sale to me would constitute a gift of equity, taxable, documented, and reported properly. She's giving you roughly $400,000 in equity, Sandra said one evening after the others had left. She said it in the way you say something you're still processing. I know, I said. Do you understand why? I thought about it. I think she's been watching Marcus be Marcus for 38 years, I said. And she decided this was the one place she could draw a line. Sandra nodded slowly. Whatever her reasons, the structure is sound. Marcus is going to lose his mind. Update 2, April. Marcus found out on a Tuesday. He found out the way we'd known he would find out, through Garrett Wills, who had been notified by the title company as a matter of standard divorce proceeding disclosure. I was at my office when my phone rang and I saw his name and let it go to voicemail. Then I called Sandra. He's going to come at this hard, she said. Garrett will file a motion to void the transaction on bad faith grounds. They'll argue collusion between you and Diane. Can they succeed? It'll be a fight. But Diane has legal standing. She has a valid clause in the original deed. She has the right to exercise it. The fact that her motivations are personal doesn't make the transaction fraudulent. Sandra was quiet for a moment. There's something else. Garrett is going to subpoena Diane. He's going to try to establish that this was a coordinated conspiracy to deprive Marcus of a marital asset. And what will Diane say? That's the question. I called Diane that evening. We had, by that point, developed something that wasn't friendship but was in the vicinity of mutual respect born from shared purpose. Garrett Wills is going to depose you, I told her. I know, she said. He called my attorney this afternoon. Are you prepared for that? There was a long pause. Marcus called me, she said. This morning. He was. She searched for the word. He was very angry. He said I had betrayed him. That I had chosen you over him. Another pause. I told him that I had chosen correctly over incorrectly. He hung up. I sat with that for a moment. Diane, I want to ask you something directly. Ask. If this gets difficult, if Garrett comes at you in the deposition with the affair, with the timeline, with your reasons, will you hold? Her voice, when she answered, was the clearest I had ever heard it. Eleanor, I have spent 38 years protecting that boy from the consequences of his choices. I have been doing him a disservice the entire time. I have no intention of doing it again. Update 3, May through June. The deposition took place on a Thursday in May, in a conference room at Garrett Wills's firm. Sandra and Diane's attorney were both present. I was not. I waited at Sandra's office across town with Rosie's school schedule spread on the table in front of me, pretending to review it. Sandra called at 4:15 p.m. She was extraordinary, Sandra said, and I could hear something underneath the professional composure, something close to admiration. Garrett tried every angle. He went at the right of first refusal clause, the timeline of her decision, whether she had discussed the sale with you in advance of filing. She answered everything directly, accurately, and without volunteering additional information. A pause. When he asked why she had decided to exercise the clause now, after holding it for 11 years, she said, and I'm quoting directly, "Because my son has conducted himself dishonestly and I saw no reason to protect him from the results of that." I closed my eyes. He tried to establish that you and she had coordinated before Marcus was served with divorce papers. She acknowledged that you had met, twice, but correctly noted that the initial contact was made by her, not you, and that both meetings occurred after divorce proceedings had already been filed. Does that help us? It helps establish that she wasn't acting on your behalf. She was acting on her own. The motion to void the transaction was heard in June. Judge Patricia Mallory, a woman in her late 50s with a reputation for patience and very little tolerance for legal theatrics, heard 2 hours of argument. Garrett presented his collusion theory at length. Sandra presented the deed clause, the independent appraisal, the clean transaction documentation, and Diane's deposition testimony. Judge Mallory took 4 days to issue her ruling. The transaction stood. The house on Elm Court was mine. Update 4, July. Marcus's response to the ruling took 3 forms. The first was an escalation of the financial negotiation in the broader divorce settlement. With the house removed from the marital asset pool, or rather, reclassified as a result of the right of first refusal transaction, his remaining claims centered on retirement accounts, the rental income one had generated from the studio, and an argument that I owed him some portion of the equity I'd received through what his attorney continued to characterize as a bad faith transaction. Sandra navigated this methodically. The rental income from the studio had been deposited into a joint account and was clearly marital. We agreed to divide that equitably. The retirement accounts were split. Marcus's own accounts, it turned out, were somewhat less robust than they should have been, a fact that emerged when both parties were required to produce full financial disclosure. Marcus had made a number of significant personal expenditures in the previous 18 months, travel, gifts, a weekend reservation at a resort in the Coast Range, that his attorney tried to minimize and that Sandra's forensic accountant did not minimize at all. The second form of Marcus's response was a period of intense pressure applied through Rosie. He became, briefly, an engaged and attentive father in the specific way that people sometimes become when they are trying to demonstrate something to a court. Sandra had counseled me to document this without escalating it, which I did. What I did not do was allow Rosie to become a tool. When she came home from weekends with her father confused by things he'd said, about the house, about why we weren't together, about Grandma Diane, I listened carefully, responded simply, and wrote down what she told me without editorializing. The third form was a period of silence from Marcus that lasted approximately 3 weeks and ended when he sent me an email through our attorneys requesting, in formal language, a modification to the custody arrangement that would give him additional time with Rosie in exchange for reduced child support obligations. Sandra and I spent an afternoon reviewing it. He's trying to trade financial obligations for parenting time, Sandra said. That's the structure. What do I do? What do you want to do? I thought about Rosie. I thought about the weekend she'd come home from Marcus's apartment. He was renting now, in a building across town, and told me with complete matter-of-factness that Daddy's friend Petra had made pancakes. I had smoothed her hair and asked if they were good pancakes, and she had said they were fine but not as good as mine, and I had felt something large and complicated move through me that I did not allow onto my face. I want Rosie to have her father in her life, I said. I don't want her to grow up and look back and think I made that harder than it had to be. So we negotiate in good faith. We negotiate in good faith. We reached a custody agreement in August that gave Marcus alternating weekends and 1 weeknight per week. The child support was adjusted modestly. It was not everything I'd wanted. It was livable, and it was fair, and it didn't require Rosie to grow up in the middle of a war. Update 5, September and after. The final divorce decree was signed on a Tuesday in September. It was raining. I drove home from Sandra's office on streets that looked like they'd been polished, and I pulled into the driveway of the house on Elm Court and sat in the car for a few minutes looking at the front garden, the Japanese maple I'd planted the year Rosie was born, now tall enough to shade the porch, the beds of salvia and ornamental grasses moving in the wet wind, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. I had built this. Not just the garden. The whole situation. Not through anger, not through dramatic confrontation, not through the kind of scorched earth response I'd fantasized about in the 3 days between the text message and the phone call to Sandra. I had built it through documentation and legal process and by being, at the critical moment, someone that a 63-year-old woman with a leather portfolio and a complicated conscience could trust to handle a significant act of calculated grace. I went inside. Rosie was at school. The house was quiet and entirely mine. I saw Diane twice after the settlement was finalized. The first time was at Rosie's school play in October. Rosie had a speaking role as a talking leaf, a part she took very seriously. Diane arrived alone, which was new. She had, I later learned, separated from her husband Philip the previous spring, for reasons that were her own and that she did not volunteer and I did not ask about. She sat 3 rows behind me and to the left. During the intermission, she found me in the hallway and told me, with characteristic economy, that Rosie had been wonderful. I thanked her. She looked at me for a moment with that expression I'd come to recognize, the tired, honest one. "How is the house?" she asked. "I'm repainting the trim," I said. Rosie picked the color. "It's a fairly alarming shade of yellow." Something moved across Diane's face that I think, in another life, in a different 11 years, might have become a smile. "She has good taste," she said. "She does," I agreed. We stood there for a moment in the school hallway, two women on the other side of something neither of us had expected to navigate together, and then the lights flickered for the second act and we went back to our seats. The second time was at Christmas. I sent her a card with a photograph of Rosie in the garden, standing next to the Japanese maple. On the back I wrote, "Thank you for what you did. I understand what it cost." I didn't hear back immediately. In early January, a card arrived in return, one of her ivory and cream style cards, precise handwriting. It said, "The cost was already spent. The house was always better in your hands." People have asked me, when I've told pieces of this story, whether I feel bad for Marcus. It's a genuine question, and I try to give it genuine consideration. The honest answer is, I feel the way you feel about a natural disaster. Not personal animosity, not satisfaction, but a kind of sober recognition that actions generate consequences and that this is, at its core, not complicated. Marcus had the house, the marriage, the child, and the affair. He conducted himself as though these things existed in separate compartments that would never intersect. What he didn't account for was that his mother had been watching all of it, from the beginning, and that she was a woman who had spent a long time being complicit and eventually reached the limit of her own compliance. I didn't take anything from Marcus. Diane took it. She had the right to. And she used that right, at significant personal cost, in her relationship with her son, in her own self-assessment as a parent, because she had decided that being complicit past a certain point was its own kind of dishonesty. I think about that a lot. About the difference between legal and just, and whether they reliably align, and what you do when they don't. The system, left to itself, would probably have given Marcus the house. Maybe not entirely. Sandra would have fought hard, the labor and expertise argument was real, but the odds weren't even. The deed was in his name. It was a gift from his family. That's a strong argument. What Diane did wasn't illegal. It wasn't even unethical, exactly, though I understand how someone could see it that way. She exercised a right she had reserved and had never relinquished. That she chose to exercise it at a specific moment, for specific reasons, doesn't diminish its legitimacy. What she gave me was not the house. She gave me stability for Rosie. She gave me the garden I'd designed from bare soil. She gave me the window seat I'd built for my daughter's bedroom, and the kitchen I'd renovated with my own weekends, and the studio apartment that now generates income, and the Japanese maple that is tall enough to shade the porch. She gave me the outcome that the math, on its own, would not have produced. It is March now. The divorce has been final for 6 months. Rosie has adjusted with the resilience of children who are loved consistently and told the truth at age-appropriate levels. She knows her parents don't live together anymore. She knows the house is where she lives with me. She knows her father loves her and that she will see him this weekend. She does not know the full story of the house, and she won't for a long time. But someday, when she is old enough, I will tell her about the phone call on a Friday afternoon, and the leather portfolio on the coffee shop table, and the woman who had spent 38 years not drawing lines and finally drew one. I will tell her that sometimes justice is not delivered by systems. Sometimes it's delivered by a person who has enough standing, enough information, and enough tired honesty to use what they have. I will tell her that I learned, during the worst 14 months of my life, that documentation matters, that legal counsel matters, that methodical thinking under emotional pressure is a skill worth developing, and that you should always read the deed. I will also tell her, though I think she'll have figured it out by then, that people are more complicated than the roles they play for years at a time. That Diane was not my ally, and then she was, and that both of those things were true and neither cancels the other out. The trim on the house is finished. Rosie's alarming yellow turned out, in full afternoon light, to be something closer to warm gold. Every time I pull into the driveway and see it, I think, we chose this. We built this. It's ours. It is, in the most complete sense I know, exactly where we belong. Edit. A lot of people are asking whether Diane and I are close now. The honest answer is no, not close. But we are something. She sends birthday cards for Rosie. I text her photographs sometimes, of the garden, of Rosie's school events. We are two people who did something complicated together and came out the other side with a mutual respect that doesn't require proximity to remain real. I think that's enough. I think, maybe, that's actually quite a lot. Edit 2. For everyone asking, yes, Sandra is worth every penny. Find yourself a Sandra.